I would do anything for you, I whispered to my unconscious father in the hospital bed, my voice breaking with each word. The ventilator's rhythmic beeping was the only sound keeping me company in this sterile white room that had become my second home for the past 3 days. I didn't know someone was listening from the doorway until I heard the soft shuffle of expensive leather shoes against linoleum. I turned around and froze. Brian Clark stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway, those piercing gray eyes that usually terrified me in board meetings, now holding an expression I'd never seen before. My boss. The man who could fire me with a single signature. The man who made grown executives stutter during presentations. What was he doing here? What happened to your father? His voice was different, softer, lacking the sharp edge that could cut through any excuse or explanation. I opened my mouth but no words came out. How could I possibly explain to the CEO of our company that I was watching my father die because I couldn't afford to save him? Brian stepped into the room, and I became acutely aware of how I must look. I hadn't showered in 2 days. My work shirt was wrinkled beyond repair, and I probably smelled like hospital coffee in desperation. His expensive cologne, something woody and masculine that I'd caught hints of during late meetings, now mixed with the antiseptic smell that had become my reality. Financial problem? He asked, and the way he said it, so matter-of-factly, made my chest tighten with shame. I nodded, feeling the tears I'd been holding back for days finally spill over. I was crying in front of my boss, the same boss who had never shown an ounce of personal interest in any of his employees, the same man who worked 16-hour days and expected everyone else to match his pace. Without hesitation, Brian pulled out his phone. His fingers moved across the screen with the same efficiency he used to close million-dollar deals. I've cleared your hospital bill. Surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. Sir, how can I ever pay you back? My voice cracked on the last word. The amount we were talking about was more than my annual salary. It was impossible money for someone like me, a junior project coordinator who lived paycheck to paycheck. Did I ask you to pay me back? His eyes held something I couldn't understand, something that made my stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with the stress of the situation. When I make a decision, I consider the consequences beforehand. He turned to leave, his hand already on the door handle, then paused. Don't come to the office tomorrow. Stay with your father. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone with my unconscious father and a million questions racing through my mind. I collapsed into the plastic chair beside my father's bed, my hands shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. Brian Clark, the cold, demanding boss who never smiled, who made interns cry, who I'd been secretly watching from afar for 2 years, had just saved my father's life without asking for anything in return. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brian's face in that hospital room. The way his usually perfect hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. The way his tie was loosened just enough to show a glimpse of his throat. The way he looked at me when he asked if it was a financial problem, not with pity but with something that looked almost like understanding. My father's surgery went perfectly. The doctors said it was touch and go for a while, but by evening he was stable and breathing on his own. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand and crying tears of relief. But underneath the gratitude there was something else growing, a feeling I couldn't name, didn't want to acknowledge. Why would Brian help me? We barely spoke at work beyond project updates and deadline confirmations. I was nobody special in his world of high-stakes business deals and corporate power plays. Yet he'd appeared at the hospital like some kind of guardian angel, throwing around money that meant nothing to him but everything to me. The next morning my father was awake and asking for water. His voice was weak but clear when he asked, "Who paid for all this, son?" I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain that your boss, a man you barely know personally, had just spent a fortune to save a stranger's life? "A friend," I said finally, though the word felt strange on my tongue. Were we friends? Could someone like Brian Clark ever be friends with someone like me? As I sat there watching my father slowly recover, I made a silent promise. Whatever Brian wanted from me, whatever his reasons for helping, I would find a way to repay him. I had no idea then that what he wanted wasn't something money could buy. The roses I'd brought from the hospital gift shop wilted in their cheap plastic vase. But my father's color was returning. Outside the window, life went on as normal. People rushing to work, cars honking in traffic, the world spinning as if my entire existence hadn't just been turned upside down by one impossible act of kindness. I pulled out my phone and stared at Brian's contact information. His number was there in my work directory, but I'd never used it for anything personal. What would I even say? Thank you seemed pathetically inadequate. The man had literally saved my father's life. My phone buzzed with a text from my coworker Sarah. "Where are you? Brian's been asking about you all morning." The message made my heart race for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. He was asking about me. The CEO of our company was wondering where his junior project coordinator had gone. I typed back, "Family emergency. We'll be back soon." But even as I sent the message, I knew that when I walked back into that office, everything would be different. The careful professional distance I'd maintained for 2 years, the secret glances during meetings, the way I'd trained myself not to react when his hand accidentally brushed mine passing documents, all of that was gone now. He'd seen me at my most vulnerable. He'd seen me cry, seen me desperate and broken and willing to beg. There was no going back to the way things were before. The question that kept me awake as I dozed in the uncomfortable hospital chair was simple. What did Brian Clark want from me in return? 3 weeks later, I was back in the office, but walking through those familiar glass doors felt like entering a completely different world. Everything looked the same. The marble lobby, the elevator that always took too long, the maze of cubicles leading to the executive floor. But I felt different, hyper-aware of every sound, every movement, every possibility that I might run into Brian. I'd barely settled at my desk when Sarah appeared with a stack of files and curious eyes. "You look better," she said, perching on the edge of my desk. "How's your dad?" "Much better, thank you." I tried to keep my voice steady, professional, but even talking about my father's recovery made me think of Brian's generosity. Every breath my father took was because of him. "Brian's been asking about you," Sarah said casually, but I caught the way she was watching my reaction. Like every day. It's weird. I've never seen him show personal interest in anyone before. My hands stilled on my keyboard. He was just being a good boss, making sure I was okay during a family crisis. "Jordan, honey, I've been here 5 years. Brian Clark doesn't do just being a good boss. The man once fired someone for taking too long of a lunch break. But with you," she shrugged. "Something's different." Before I could respond, my computer chimed with a calendar notification. Meeting with Brian Clark. 5 p.m. today. My heart immediately started racing. I'd been dreading and anticipating this moment since I'd walked back into the building. The rest of the day crawled by. I couldn't concentrate on anything, jumping every time someone walked past my cubicle, constantly checking the clock. By 4:30 I was a nervous wreck. I'd changed my shirt twice, fixed my hair in the bathroom mirror more times than I could count, and gone through an entire pack of mints. At exactly 5 p.m. I knocked on Brian's office door. His voice called, "Come in," and I stepped into the space that had always intimidated me. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. Expensive artwork lined the walls and everything screamed power and success. But tonight, with most of the office empty and the city lights beginning to twinkle outside, it felt different. More intimate. Brian was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, but when he saw me, he stood up. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, showing strong forearms that I definitely shouldn't be noticing. "How's your father?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. "Much better, sir. Thank you." I remained standing near the door, uncertain whether I should sit or wait for permission. "I wanted to talk about repaying you for—" "When did I ask you to pay me back?" His tone was sharper than usual, cutting off my prepared speech. "Do you think I'm running a charity here?" I felt confused and a little hurt. If he didn't want repayment, what did he want? Then what do you need from me? The question hung in the air between us for a long moment. Brian walked around his desk and suddenly he was much closer than I'd expected. Close enough that I could smell his cologne again. See the way his expensive shirt fit perfectly across his broad shoulders. "Maybe I want your time," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Your attention." He took another step closer, and I found myself backing up until I hit the door. Maybe I want you. I couldn't breathe. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding, some cosmic joke. Men like Brian Clark didn't want people like me. I was nobody special, just another employee in a building full of them. Sir, I don't understand. Brian, he corrected, and his hand came up to touch my cheek. The contact sent electricity shooting through my entire body. When it's just us, call me Brian. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, and I felt like I might pass out. Do you have any idea how long I've been waiting for you to see me as something other than just your boss? The world tilted on its axis. This was really happening. Brian Clark, powerful, untouchable Brian Clark, was touching me like I was something precious, looking at me like I was the only person in the world. Brian, I started to say something, anything, but before I could finish, his secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. Sir, your 8 p.m. meeting guests have arrived. The spell shattered. Brian stepped back immediately, his hand falling away from my face as his professional mask slid back into place. The transformation was so quick it gave me whiplash. 1 second he was touching me like a lover. The next he was straightening his tie and checking his watch like nothing had happened. We'll continue this conversation later, he said, his voice back to its usual controlled tone. But his eyes were still burning as they met mine. Jordan, I meant what I said. All of it. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and practically fled from his office. In the elevator, I leaned against the wall and tried to catch my breath. My face was burning where he'd touched me, and I could still feel the warmth of his body when he'd stood so close. What was happening to me? This was my boss, the CEO of the company where I worked. This was professional suicide waiting to happen. But as I drove home through the evening traffic, all I could think about was the way Brian had looked at me, the way his voice had gone soft and intimate when he said my name. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of our interaction. The way he'd moved around his desk with predatory grace. The way his hand had felt against my skin, warm and slightly rough, like he worked with his hands despite his executive position. The way he'd said, maybe I want you, like it was the most natural thing in the world. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hope you got home safely. Sleep well. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you. Good night. His reply came instantly. Sweet dreams, Jordan. I fell asleep with my phone clutched in my hand and Brian's words echoing in my mind. Tomorrow I would have to face him again, pretend to work normally while processing the fact that everything had changed between us. The careful professional relationship we'd maintained was officially over. The question was, what would replace it? This is wrong, I told myself for the 100th time. But I couldn't stop thinking about Brian's touch, couldn't stop replaying the way he'd looked at me in his office. During the day he was still my demanding boss, sharp, focused, driving everyone to meet impossible deadlines. But late evenings had become something else entirely. It started innocently enough. Brian began asking me to stay after regular office hours for additional projects. The first time I genuinely thought it was work-related. But when I arrived at his office with my laptop and notepad ready to take notes, he just gestured to the chair across from his desk and asked, "How's your father's recovery going?" We talked for 2 hours. Not about work, not about deadlines or client presentations, but about my father's physical therapy, about how proud he was that I'd made something of myself, about my fears of losing the only family I had left. Brian listened with an intensity that made me feel like I was the most important person in the world, asking thoughtful questions and sharing small pieces of his own life in return. "What's your favorite color?" he asked one evening. Leaning back in his executive chair, his tie loosened and the top button of his shirt undone. The office was quiet around us, most employees having left hours ago. "Blue," I answered, then felt compelled to ask, "What about you?" "Whatever color you're wearing," he said with a slight smile that made my stomach flutter and my cheeks burn. These evening conversations became our secret routine. Brian would send me a casual email about reviewing quarterly projections or discussing upcoming client needs, but when I arrived at his office, we'd end up talking about everything except work. I learned that he'd grown up in foster care, that he'd worked 3 jobs to put himself through business school, that he played piano when he couldn't sleep. "I never expected to run a company this size," he admitted one night, staring out at the city lights. "Sometimes I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." You're not pretending, I said softly. You're just more than people expect. He turned to look at me then, his gray eyes intense in the dim lighting. Is that what you think? That I'm more than you expected? I nodded, not trusting my voice. The air between us felt charged, electric with possibility and danger. But the next morning, everything shifted. I was getting coffee in the break room when I overheard two senior managers talking by the window. Brian definitely has his favorites. Lisa from accounting was saying, that Jordan kid gets all the easy assignments now. Extended deadlines, special treatment. Wonder what he's doing to earn it. My blood turned to ice. Marcus from sales laughed. Maybe he's just really good at his job. Come on, Marcus. Jordan's competent, but he's not miracle worker material. Something else is going on there. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I'd never asked for special treatment. But how could I without revealing the truth? That my boss had paid for my father's surgery, that we'd been having intimate conversations every evening for weeks, that I was falling for him despite every rational thought in my head screaming that this was a disaster waiting to happen. During lunch, I couldn't take it anymore. I marched to Brian's office and knocked harder than I should have. Come in, he called, and I entered to find him reviewing contracts, looking every inch the powerful executive in his perfectly tailored suit. People are talking, I said without preamble. He looked up, one eyebrow raised. About what? About me getting special treatment. About favoritism. About what I might be doing to earn it. The words tumbled out in a rush. Brian set down his pen and gave me his full attention. And what do you think you're doing to earn it? I don't know. I exploded, then caught myself and lowered my voice. That's the problem. I don't know what this is, what we're doing, what you want from me. He stood up, moving around his desk with that controlled grace that always made my pulse quicken. What do you think I want from you, Jordan? I took a shaky breath. I think you want something I don't know how to give. Something that could ruin both our careers. And what if I do? He was close now, close enough that I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. What if I want something that has nothing to do with work, nothing to do with this office or these people or what anyone thinks? Then you're asking me to risk everything, I whispered. I'm not asking you to risk anything, he said softly. I'm telling you that I've already risked everything. The moment I paid for your father's surgery, the moment I let myself care about you more than I should, I crossed a line I can never uncross. The confession hung between us, heavy with implication. Brian, I know this is complicated. I know the power dynamic is fucked up, and people will talk and it could destroy both our careers. But I also know that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you for months. Long before your father got sick, long before I had an excuse to get close to you, my heart was pounding so hard I was certain he could hear it. How long? Remember the Morrison presentation last year? You caught an error in the financial projections that would have cost us the client. You stayed until 3 a.m. fixing it, and when I found you asleep at your desk the next morning, you had ink stains on your cheek from where you'd fallen asleep on your notes. I remembered that night, remembered how exhausted I'd been, how determined to get everything perfect. I watched you for 20 minutes before I woke you up. Brian continued. You looked so peaceful, so beautiful, and I realized I was in serious trouble. That's when I knew I was falling for my employee, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. The room felt like it was spinning. All those months when I'd thought I was harboring a hopeless secret crush, he'd been watching me too, wanting me to. This could destroy us, I said weakly. I know. He reached out and touched my face, the same gentle touch from before. But I'm tired of pretending I don't want you. I'm tired of professional distance and appropriate boundaries, and acting like you're just another employee when you're so much more than that. What am I to you? I asked, leaning into his touch despite every rational thought screaming at me to step away. You're the person I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I fall asleep. You're the reason I look forward to coming to work and the reason I can't concentrate during meetings. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for and everything I can't afford to lose. Before I could overthink it, before fear could stop me, I stood on my toes and kissed him. It was supposed to be quick, experimental, a test to see if the electricity between us was real. But the moment our lips touched, Brian's arms came around me, pulling me closer, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate and absolutely right. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Brian rested his forehead against mine. "There's no going back from this," he murmured. "I know," I whispered back. "People will talk. It could get messy." "I know. I'm your boss. This breaks every rule in the book." "I know that too." He pulled back to look at me, his eyes searching mine. "And you're still here?" "I'm still here," I confirmed. Brian smiled then, the first real smile I'd ever seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. "Then we'll figure it out, together." As I left his office that evening, my lips still tingling from our kiss, I knew I'd just stepped off a cliff. There was no safety net, no guarantee of a soft landing. But for the first time in my life, I was ready to fall. I tried to maintain distance after our kiss. Tried to convince myself it was a moment of weakness that we could both forget and move past. But Brian made forgetting impossible. He didn't push or demand explanations for why I'd been avoiding his evening meetings. Instead, he launched a subtle campaign that slowly broke down every wall I'd tried to rebuild between us. It started with small things. My favorite coffee appeared on my desk every morning. Not the cheap stuff from the office machine, but the expensive French roast from the cafe 3 blocks away that I'd mentioned loving, but could never afford regularly. When I looked up, Brian would be walking past my cubicle toward the elevator, not acknowledging the gift, but catching my eye just long enough for me to see the hint of a smile. Then came the books. I casually mentioned during one of our conversations that I'd been wanting to read a particular novel but hadn't had time to get to the bookstore. The next day, a brand new copy appeared on my desk with a simple sticky note. "Thought you might enjoy this." The day after that, it was a collection of short stories by an author I'd never heard of but immediately fell in love with. "Someone has a secret admirer," Sarah teased, picking up the latest book, a first edition of something I'd mentioned wanting to read in college. "This is expensive, Jordan. Like really expensive." I shrugged, trying to look nonchalant while my heart raced. "Maybe it's from the office book club." "We don't have an office book club," she pointed out with a knowing look. "And even if we did, they wouldn't be buying first editions." "Someone's trying to impress you." Every gesture made it harder to convince myself that what was happening between Brian and me was just gratitude or momentary attraction. These weren't random acts of kindness, they were carefully chosen, personal, showing that he'd been listening to every conversation we'd had, remembering details I'd forgotten I'd shared. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. I was staying late to finish a presentation for Monday, when I noticed the office had emptied out around me. My computer screen was beginning to blur from staring at it too long when I heard footsteps approaching my cubicle. "You shouldn't be here this late," Brian's voice made me look up. He was standing beside my desk, his suit jacket slung over his arm and his tie loosened. It was past 8 p.m. "Just finishing up the Morrison account presentation," I said, trying to keep my voice professional. "I wanted to make sure everything was perfect." "It always is with you." He moved closer, and I caught that familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "How's your father doing?" The question caught me off guard. We hadn't talked about personal things since our kiss. Hadn't had any of those intimate evening conversations that had become our routine. "He's doing well. Physical therapy is going great. He might be able to go back to work part-time next month." "That's good to hear." Brian's voice was warm, genuine. "You must be relieved." "I am." I saved my work and closed my laptop, suddenly aware that we were completely alone in the office. "Thank you, by the way, for everything. I know I haven't said it properly, but what you did, it saved his life, Jordan." Brian's voice was soft, and when I looked up at him, his gray eyes were intense. "Can I drive you home?" I should have said no, should have made some excuse about having my own car or needing to stop somewhere. But instead, I heard myself saying, "Okay." The elevator ride to the parking garage was silent but charged with tension. Brian's expensive sedan was sleek and black, and sitting in the passenger seat felt intimate in a way that made my pulse quicken. The leather seats still held the warmth of the day, and the interior smelled like him, clean and masculine and dangerously appealing. "Where do you live?" he asked, starting the engine. I gave him my address, then immediately regretted it. My apartment was in a decent but obviously lower-income neighborhood. Nothing like the upscale area where someone like Brian probably lived. But he just nodded and pulled out of the garage. We drove in comfortable silence for the first few minutes, the city lights streaming past the windows. Then Brian spoke, his voice careful and measured. Jordan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. My stomach dropped. Okay, did I help your father because I had feelings for you? The direct question hit me like a physical blow. I turned to look at his profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel just a little too tightly. I don't know, I said quietly. Did you? Brian pulled over to the side of the road and put the car in park. When he turned to face me, his eyes were burning with an intensity that made my breath catch. Yes, he said simply. I'd been watching you for months, Jordan. The way you work late without complaining, how you're always polite to everyone even when they don't deserve it. The way you care about doing things right even when no one else would notice. When I saw you crying in that hospital, when I realized what you were going through, he ran a hand through his dark hair. I knew I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. But you didn't even know me personally then. We barely talked outside of work. I didn't need to know you personally to see who you are, he said. You're kind, Jordan. Genuinely kind in a way that's rare in our world. You work harder than people who make twice your salary. And you never complain or ask for recognition. You hold doors for people, you remember birthdays. You stay late to help coworkers with projects that aren't even your responsibility. I stared at him, amazed that he'd noticed so many small things I'd never thought anyone paid attention to. When I saw you breaking down in that hospital room, talking to your unconscious father about how you'd do anything for him, I realized I felt the same way about you, that I'd do anything to take away your pain, to give you what you needed. Brian, I started, but he wasn't finished. I'm not proud of using your crisis as an excuse to get closer to you, but I'm not sorry I helped. And I'm not sorry it brought us to this point. The only thing I'm sorry about is that it took a tragedy for me to find the courage to let you know how I feel. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it in the quiet car. This is so complicated. The power dynamic, the office politics, what people will think. I know all that, Brian said, reaching over to take my hand. His was warm and slightly rough, and the contact sent electricity up my arm. But before we worry about any of that, I'd like to know something. Are you here because you feel grateful to me, or because you actually have feelings for me? I looked into his eyes, those beautiful gray eyes that had been haunting my dreams for months, and felt my defenses crumble completely. Brian, I've been half in love with you since my first week at the company, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I used to time my coffee breaks so I might see you in the elevator. I memorized your schedule so I'd know when you'd be walking past my department. I've spent 2 years trying to be invisible while desperately wanting you to notice me. His grip on my hand tightened. Then why are you pulling away now? Because I'm terrified, I said honestly. I'm terrified that people will think I'm using you, or that you'll get tired of me, or that this will destroy both our careers. I'm terrified that I'm not good enough for someone like you, and I'm terrified of how much I want this despite all of that. Brian's free hand came up to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing across my skin in that gentle way that made me melt. Jordan, listen to me. You are more than good enough. You're everything I never knew I wanted and everything I can't imagine living without. But what if we're happy? He interrupted. What if this works? What if we figure out how to make it work despite all the complications? Before I could overthink it, before fear could stop me again, I leaned across the console and kissed him. This time it wasn't desperate or uncertain. It was sure and sweet and full of all the feelings I'd been trying to suppress. When we broke apart, Brian rested his forehead against mine. I want to try, Jordan. Whatever the risks, whatever the complications, I want to try this with you. So do I whispered back, and meant it completely. He smiled then, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Then we'll figure it out together. As he started the car and pulled back into traffic, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't just falling. I was choosing to fall, choosing to trust, choosing to believe that maybe, just maybe, some risks were worth taking. Keeping our relationship secret at work became an exhausting performance that required constant vigilance and perfect acting skills. Every interaction had to be carefully calculated, too friendly and people would suspect something. Too distant and Brian might think I was having second thoughts. We developed an intricate system of stolen glances during meetings, accidental touches when passing documents, and text messages disguised as work communications. Can you stay late tonight to review the quarterly projections? Brian would email me and I'd know it was code for I need to see you. But sitting across from him in his office after hours, pretending to discuss business while desperately wanting to touch him, was its own special kind of torture. The hardest part wasn't the secrecy itself. It was watching other people interact with Brian in ways I couldn't. During the monthly office party, I had to stand by and watch Sarah from marketing flirt shamelessly with him, her hand lingering on his arm when she laughed at his polite responses. My chest burned with jealousy, but I couldn't do anything except smile and make small talk with other coworkers while internally screaming. "You look like you want to murder someone," Marcus from sales commented, following my gaze to where Sarah was still monopolizing Brian's attention. "Just tired," I lied, forcing my expression into something more neutral. "Sure you are," Marcus said with a knowing smirk. "Word of advice, kid. Office crushes never end well. Trust me on that one." The comment hit too close to home, making me retreat to the bathroom where I could splash cold water on my face and remind myself why we were keeping things secret. Brian wasn't just my boyfriend. He was still my boss. Still the CEO of the company where I needed to work to pay my bills and support my father's ongoing medical expenses. 2 months into our secret relationship, the strain was beginning to show. I found myself snapping at coworkers for minor things, losing sleep because I was constantly analyzing every interaction Brian and I had for signs that someone might be suspicious. The stress was eating me alive. "I can't do this anymore," I told Brian one night in his apartment. We'd started spending time at his place on weekends. A stunning penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist decor that screamed wealth and sophistication. It should have been relaxing, but tonight I was too wound up to appreciate the luxury. "What can't you do?" Brian looked up from where he was cooking dinner, something he'd discovered I loved watching him do. There was something incredibly sexy about seeing this powerful man who commanded boardrooms moving efficiently around a kitchen, sleeves rolled up and completely focused on creating something just for me. "Watch Sarah flirt with you all day while I can't say anything. Pretend like I don't care when people make jokes about office crushes. Act like you're just my boss when all I want is to tell everyone that you're mine." Brian set down his knife and turned to face me fully. "You're jealous." "Of course I'm jealous." The admission burst out of me before I could stop it. "You're my boyfriend, but I can't claim you publicly. I can't protect you when people hit on you, can't take your hand during stressful meetings, can't even look at you the way I want to because someone might notice." "Jordan." Brian moved toward me, his expression serious. "Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I enjoy watching you smile politely at everyone when all I want is to announce to the entire company that you're taken?" The possessiveness in his voice sent shivers down my spine, but it also frustrated me. "Then why are we doing this? Why are we hiding like we're ashamed of each other?" "Because I'm trying to protect both our careers," Brian said, pulling me into his arms. "Because the moment people find out about us, everything changes. Your coworkers will question every promotion, every assignment, every decision I make regarding you. My board of directors will wonder if I can maintain professional judgment. It gets complicated fast." I leaned into his embrace, breathing in his familiar scent and trying to calm the anxiety that had been building for weeks. "I know you're right. I hate feeling like I'm living a double life. What if I told you I've been looking into solutions?" Brian's voice was careful, measured in that way that meant he'd been thinking about this as much as I had. I pulled back to look at him. "What kind of solutions?" "Company policy allows for relationships between employees as long as there's no direct reporting relationship. If one of us transferred to a different department or if I promoted you to a level where you'd report to someone else instead of me, you'd do that? Change the entire structure of your company for us?" "Jordan, I'd change anything for us." His hands came up to frame my face, thumbs brushing across my cheekbones in that gentle way that never failed to make my heart race. "But I need to know you're serious about this, that you're not going to panic and run the moment things get complicated." "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "I'm terrified and stressed and probably in way over my head, but I'm not going anywhere." That weekend, we spent hours talking about possibilities, about what our future might look like if we stopped hiding. Brian showed me company organizational charts, explaining how different reporting structures might work. What positions might be opening up that could give me more responsibility while removing the direct conflict of interest. There's a new project management position opening up in our Seattle branch, he said, pointing to a document on his laptop screen. Same company, same benefits, significant salary increase, but you'd be reporting to the regional director instead of me. My stomach dropped. Seattle? That's across the country. I know it's not ideal, but, Brian, I can't move to Seattle. My father just finished his recovery and he's finally getting back on his feet. I can't leave him now. I'm not asking you to leave him. I'm asking you to consider all our options. What about you considering options that don't involve separating us geographically? Brian closed the laptop and turned to face me fully. You're right. That was a stupid suggestion. I guess I'm just frustrated that there's no easy answer to this. Maybe there doesn't need to be an easy answer, I said slowly, an idea beginning to form. Maybe we just need to be honest about what we want and figure out how to make it work. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time to stop hiding. Maybe it's time to tell people we're together and deal with whatever consequences come from that. Brian stared at me for a long moment. Jordan, once we cross that line, there's no going back. People will have opinions. There will be gossip. It could affect both our careers in ways we can't predict. I know, I said, taking his hands in mine. But living like this is affecting us too. I'd rather face whatever comes from being honest than keep pretending you're just my boss when you're so much more than that. Brian's expression softened and he squeezed my hands. You're sure about this? I'm sure about you. About us. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. He leaned in and kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When we broke apart, his eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. Okay, he said quietly. Let's stop hiding. As we sat there on his expensive couch, city lights twinkling outside the windows, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. Openly and honestly. For the first time in months, that felt like enough. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me feel optimistic about new beginnings. Instead, I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. Today was the day Brian and I had decided to stop hiding, though we hadn't exactly figured out how to make that announcement without causing complete chaos. I was barely at my desk for 20 minutes when my computer chimed with an email that made my blood turn to ice. Please report to HR at 10 a.m. for a mandatory meeting. Director of Human Resources. My hands were shaking as I reread the message. Someone knew. Someone had figured out what was happening between Brian and me, and now everything was about to come crashing down. I glanced toward the executive floor, wondering if Brian had received a similar summons, but I couldn't see him from my cubicle. You look like you've seen a ghost, Sarah commented, appearing at my desk with her usual morning coffee and gossip. Everything okay? Just a meeting with HR, I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Ooh, that's never good. What did you do? Nothing, I said quickly, then realized how defensive that sounded. I mean, I have no idea what it's about. Probably just some routine thing. But I knew it wasn't routine. In my gut, I knew someone had seen something, noticed something, put pieces together that Brian and I thought we'd kept carefully separated. The next hour crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every minute feeling like an eternity as I tried to concentrate on work while my mind raced through worst-case scenarios. At exactly 10 a.m., I knocked on the HR director's door. Janet Morrison was a stern woman in her 50s, who had a reputation for being fair but absolutely no nonsense. When she called for me to enter, I stepped into her office and immediately froze. Brian was already there, sitting in one of the two chairs positioned in front of Janet's desk. He looked completely calm, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his expression giving nothing away. But I caught the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clasped just a little too tightly in his lap. Mr. Hayes, please have a seat, Janet said, gesturing to the empty chair beside Brian. I sat down carefully, hyper-aware of Brian's presence beside me but not daring to look at him directly. I've called both of you here today because some concerns have been raised about favoritism and inappropriate workplace relationships. Janet began, her tone professionally neutral but carrying an edge that made my stomach drop further. There have been observations about extended private meetings, special treatment regarding assignments and deadlines, and behavior that suggests a personal relationship that goes beyond professional boundaries. The room felt like it was spinning. This was it, the end of my career, the end of everything I'd worked for. I started to speak, to deny everything or try to explain, but Brian's voice cut through my panic. "You're absolutely right," he said calmly. "There has been favoritism and there is an inappropriate workplace relationship." I stared at him in shock. What was he doing? We hadn't discussed confessing everything. We'd barely discussed how to handle being more open, let alone dealing with an HR investigation. "I've been in love with Jordan for months," Brian continued, his voice steady and professional despite the earth-shattering nature of what he was saying. "I haven't been able to maintain appropriate professional boundaries, and that's entirely my responsibility as his supervisor and as a senior executive of this company." "Brian, what are you doing?" I whispered, but he kept talking. "I want to be completely transparent about the timeline and nature of our relationship. My feelings for Jordan began approximately 8 months ago, long before any personal assistance I provided to him during his family crisis. Those feelings influenced my decision to help with his father's medical expenses, and they've influenced my professional judgment regarding his work assignments since then." Janet was taking notes, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Clark, you understand that as his direct supervisor, this puts both of you in a very complicated position legally and professionally." "I do understand that, which is why I'm prepared to accept full responsibility and any consequences that result from my poor judgment. However, I want to be absolutely clear that Jordan has done nothing wrong. He didn't initiate this relationship, didn't ask for special treatment, and has consistently maintained professional behavior even when I failed to do so." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Brian was falling on his sword for both of us, taking complete blame for everything that had happened. The gesture was noble and terrifying in equal measure. "That's not true," I said, finding my voice. "I mean, it's not entirely true. This relationship, it's mutual. I have feelings for Brian too, and I made the choice to pursue those feelings despite knowing the potential consequences." Janet looked between us, her expression giving nothing away. "This is highly unusual. In most cases when we discover inappropriate relationships, both parties deny any wrongdoing. Your honesty is appreciated, but it does complicate matters, which is why I have a proposal," Brian said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm formally requesting a transfer to our sister company's Seattle branch. Same role, same responsibilities, but no direct authority over Jordan or anyone else in this office. That would eliminate the conflict of interest while allowing both of us to continue our careers without disruption." "Seattle?" I turned to stare at him. "We talked about this. I can't move to Seattle." "You wouldn't have to," Brian said quietly, finally meeting my eyes. "I would." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Brian was willing to move across the country, to completely uproot his life and career, just so we could be together without professional complications. The sacrifice was enormous, and completely unnecessary. "No," I said firmly. "Absolutely not. You're not leaving your life here because of me." "Jordan." "No, Brian, we'll find another solution." Janet cleared her throat, reminding us that we weren't alone. "Perhaps there are other alternatives to consider. Mr. Hayes, there's actually a senior project coordinator position opening up in our Los Angeles branch that would be a significant promotion for you. It would remove the direct reporting relationship while keeping both of you within the company structure." I felt Brian tense beside me. "Los Angeles is still relocating Jordan because of my mistakes." "Actually," Janet said, consulting her notes, "Mr. Hayes's performance reviews and project completions make him a strong candidate for advancement regardless of this situation. This particular position has been posted internally for 2 weeks and he would have been eligible to apply through normal channels." The information reframed everything. This wasn't about punishment or forced relocation, it was about an opportunity that existed independent of our relationship. "What exactly would this position involve?" I asked carefully. "Senior project coordinator for our West Coast entertainment clients. Significant salary increase, full relocation package, and you'd be reporting directly to the regional vice president. It's actually a considerable step up from your current role." I looked at Brian, seeing the conflict in his eyes. This could solve our professional problems while advancing my career, but it would still mean geographic separation. How often does the LA office coordinate with headquarters? Brian asked. Monthly in-person meetings, plus ongoing virtual collaboration on cross-regional projects. There would be significant interaction between the positions. I felt pieces clicking into place. Not perfect but workable. A solution that didn't require either of us to sacrifice our careers or our relationship. I'd like to apply for the position, I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. Brian turned to look at me fully. Jordan, you don't have to. I want to, I interrupted. Not because I have to, but because it's a good opportunity, and because I think we can make the distance work if we're both committed to it. Are you sure? I'm sure about us. The rest we'll figure out. 2 weeks later, I was packing boxes in my apartment, preparing for a move that felt both terrifying and exciting. Brian appeared in my doorway carrying coffee and wearing jeans and a casual shirt that made him look younger and more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. How's the packing going? He asked, handing me one of the cups. Almost done. I can't believe how much stuff I've accumulated in this tiny place. Are you nervous? I considered the question seriously. Yes and no. Nervous about the new job, about living in a new city, about whether we can make a long-distance relationship work. But not nervous about us. Not anymore. Brian smiled, pulling a small box from his pocket. I have something for you. Inside was a simple silver band. Elegant and understated, but clearly expensive. It's a promise ring, he said quietly. A promise that distance doesn't change how I feel about you. That I'll be here whenever you need me. That this is just the beginning for us. I slipped the ring onto my finger, feeling its weight like an anchor. I love you, Brian. I love you too, he said, pulling me into his arms. And I'm proud of you for taking this chance, for being brave enough to bet on us. As we stood there in my half-packed apartment, holding each other surrounded by boxes that represented new beginnings, I realized that sometimes the biggest risks led to the best rewards. We'd found each other in the most unexpected way, survived complications that could have destroyed us, and come out stronger on the other side. The future was uncertain, but it was ours to build together. And that felt like everything I'd ever wanted.